Today is Friday, November 29th, 2024, and it's time for the November drill of the month. So outside it's very cold, probably 29 degrees, blowing snow, very windy. So windy I'm going to have to shoot this part of the video indoors because of the wind noise. So for today's drill of the month, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about firearms training. There are firearms instructors out there of all different shapes and sizes and different approaches. So I wanted to share. We hosted Frank Proctor at the Mount Gilead Police Range in July of this year, and it's the third time I trained with Frank. Very informative, very beneficial. So Frank talks about shooting being composed of two things: what you're seeing and what you're doing. So, and this is my handwriting, but it's based on a similar chart that he made right there on the range with us. So the seeing part, basically, according to Frank, what you need to see is, first of all, is you need to see the place on the target that you want to hit. You're focused on visually on the place that you want the bullet to go. So you see the place on the target that you want to hit. You see the sights on that place the way that you need to see them to make that particular shot. So it depends on how accurate you have to be. It's going to be variable, but basically see the sights on the place that you want to hit the way that you need to see them to make that particular shot. Then the third thing, you want to see what happens when you trigger the gun, and Frank calls that the shot call. Basically, you want to see that front sight lift and then come back. And then the fourth part, see where you want the sight to return. So you're trying to shoot two shots on the same target. You want to watch that sight leave. You want to watch it come right back. Meanwhile, the doing part, mount your sights to your eye. Then you want to trigger the gun clean enough to make that particular shot. Make the gun come back to where you want it. If you're shooting two shots on the same target, make it come back to where it left. If you're transitioning to a different target, you want to make the gun arrive where it is that you want to shoot, and use your body to get your eyes to places to see more targets. Then, of course, the doing part would also include manipulations such as draws, reloads, and malfunctions. So Frank is an advanced instructor, very competent, world-class shooter, world-class instructor. And I'm not. I'm what's called a gateway instructor. I'm not suggesting that gateway instructors don't need to be competent, don't need to be good. But my forte, kind of my wheelhouse, is taking people who've never fired a gun before and teaching them how to move the needle and get some skills relatively quickly. So when I teach a firearms class, I look at it like three different distinct skill sets. There'd be marksmanship fundamentals, gun handling technique, and then gunfighting tactics. So this is a chart from a class that I taught where I'm just focusing on fundamentals and a little bit about technique. But when I describe fundamentals, marksmanship fundamentals, that's getting the bullet to where you want it to go. Can you hit the target? So basically four things that comprise marksmanship fundamentals: sight alignment, sight picture, trigger control, and then follow through. So basically the first two involve the sights, the second two involve the trigger. So the way I look at it, if you've ever trained with Clint Smith, I've trained with Clint twice. He's very famous for saying you've got two controls over the bullet, one visual and one physical. Your last visual control over the bullet is your sights. Your last physical control over the bullet would be your trigger. So if you can learn to pay attention wherever the sights, right when the gun fired, that will tell you where you hit. And then you make a good press on the trigger. If you got a good sight picture, then that's where the bullet's going to go. So when I teach this, I talk about, you can take a beginner and teach them sight alignment and sight picture relatively quickly. Most people don't struggle too much with that. The trigger control and the follow through are going to be a little bit more elusive. But when I do this, I have a scale here between 0 and 100. So it's kind of relative, kind of dependent. What kind of sight picture do I need to hit this particular target? So Frank describes it as see the sights the way that I need to see them. And then trigger control, how much trigger control do I need to make this particular shot? Frank says trigger the gun cleanly enough. So if you're shooting slow fire, absolute marksmanship, absolute precision, you want the best sight picture you can get and the cleanest break on the trigger you can get. Shooting up close and fast at a relatively large target, you can get away with a little bit of flexibility in how well you see the sights and how cleanly you trigger the gun. So you can be pretty aggressive with the trigger on certain types of shots. And then follow through is probably the most elusive part. You want to press the trigger and wait for the recoil. So something that's good for me, it's good for anybody actually, but I tend to shoot a 1911 with a short, light trigger press. I can get away with things on the trigger and the follow through that aren't necessarily the best at keeping me honest. So something I like to do from time to time is train with a double action revolver and shoot at double action. So make sure it's not loaded, and it's not. When I fire the gun double action, my trigger has to perform two functions. Number one, my finger, I'm using my trigger power, my finger power here to both cock the revolver and then also release it. So my trigger finger performs two functions. So when I have to shoot double action, I can't cheat on the follow through. If I have my 1911 and I have my finger on the trigger, if my finger moves maybe 1/8 of an inch, probably not even that much, the gun will have fired. On a double action, the whole movement my trigger finger makes is probably going to be probably about 3/4 of an inch. So if I'm used to like stopping my focus and stopping my follow through after 1/8 of an inch of movement, the gun hasn't fired yet. So it keeps me honest. I have to basically press that trigger all the way to the rear and follow through on the shot and not quit on it. So I press the trigger, I wait for the recoil. So what I want to do is get a good sight picture and then break the trigger as cleanly as I can. Well, I talk about getting my finger on the trigger and bringing it straight back towards the rear. That's not exactly as easy as it sounds, because if you look at my finger placement here, I'm going, since I'm a right-handed shooter, my trigger finger is going across the trigger from right to left. But also when I hold it with a good grip, you'll notice that I'm actually coming from right to left, but also from top to bottom. So my finger is actually not laying straight across the trigger. It's kind of in this position where I'm going to have to press the trigger this way. So if I'm not careful, I can push the muzzle one direction or pull it in the opposite direction. I want to bring the trigger straight back. So the best way I know how to work on that is something I learned from Ron Avery, the late Ron Avery. I've never trained with Ron directly, but I did buy his video years ago. He's got this target called the trigger rhythm target, and basically it's just this black stick. And different ways you can use this, but the way I was using it today is I stand the distance about 12 feet. This is my Smith Wesson M27-2 with a 5-inch barrel. Of course, today I'm just shooting 38 specials out of it, which is all I need for what I was doing today. And at 12 feet, when I get a sight picture right on that black stick, my front sight appears to be about the same width as the black stick. So if I bring that trigger straight back, then I should hit the black stick with no problem. Now, I'm not doing this real slow fire. I'm trying to, and the reason it's called trigger rhythm, it's like you want to press the trigger without interruption, but also get a good trigger press out of it. So with a double action revolver, there's a certain rhythm to it. I don't want to go super slow where it's almost like single action shooting. So I don't want to like bring the hammer back and then pause until eventually we fire. What I want to practice instead, work on developing, is the ability to go straight through without any hesitation. See, it requires a certain amount of follow through. So I'm not pulling the gun that way. I'm not pushing the gun that way. I'm bringing it straight back towards my eyeball and trying to get a good hit on the stick. So on this target, I have the camera behind the target, and I fired 6 rounds. You can see there are 2 bullets that went in that hole, and the other 4 are on the stick. So in that case, I think those might have been my first 2 shots. I had a little bit of pulling on the muzzle as I'm trying to bring the trigger straight back. The other 4 were pretty good though. So then I moved the camera to behind me and I shot 4 more times. It's very cold, my hands are numb. This isn't a bad group. You can see I'm just moving the muzzle a little bit to the left. That'd be kind of pushing it that way. So I had good consistency, but not what I wanted. Then I moved over here. I think that's actually a double right there. There's 4 right there. So again, it's real easy, especially the double action. It will keep you honest. You got to have that smooth rhythm all the way through from start to finish. So I go down here. This is probably my best target. I probably should just stopped after this. I think that was my first shot. And these are the other 5. So now I'm starting to get the hang of it. So then kind of got a little overconfident. I moved to the last target here and I sped up slightly and kind of got out of my rhythm. And you can see I've got 2 controls with my bullet. I've got one visual, where are my sights, then what am I doing with my trigger. So at 12 feet, aiming at that black stick, it's not like I'm gonna aim over here or aim over there. I'm aiming right on the black stick, but what's causing me to not hit the black stick is what I'm doing with the trigger. And this double action revolver, if you're in a slump, pull out a double action, work on it. Even when you're not in a slump, it's gonna keep you honest. It's gonna develop good trigger habits. So that's the drill of the month this week. So I fired 30 rounds doing the trigger rhythm, and then I fired 1 round at 50 yards just to see how it worked on the steel target. So my Smith & Wesson, this is a 1975 model. It's got the pinned and recessed cylinder if you're a Smith & Wesson fan, which I am, and it's a very smooth action, probably about a 12-pound pull on the double action pull, but it's very smooth. This has a target trigger, which is extra wide, and it's got serrations on it, so it's not exactly the best for double action trigger presses, but it's certainly not the worst. So that's it for the November drill of the month. Did the Trigger Rhythm Drill by Ron Avery, the late Ron Avery, and something I like to pull out from time to time just to work on keeping my trigger finger honest. We'll see you next month.